It's extremely clear that we are going to have AGI within the next couple years. That's OpenAI President Greg Brockman speaking with Alex Kantrowitz on the Big Technology podcast. He doesn't mean a clean sci-fi moment. He means a jagged system that still changes what it feels like to use a computer. The two things that jumped out were how compute-limited OpenAI says it is and why they're obsessed with one Superapp instead of a dozen side quests. From the outside, it can look like OpenAI won consumer AI with ChatGPT, and then stepped away from the fun stuff to focus on work tools. Inside the company, the story sounds less like a B2B pivot and more like triage. The technology crossed a threshold where benchmarks and demos don't teach you enough anymore. You need real-world feedback from people doing knowledge work with messy context and real stakes. And then there's the constraint Brockman keeps coming back to: limited compute. Not we'd like more, but we can't fund everything we want. So they stack rank what matters most. At the top are two outcomes that sound simple but swallow everything. A personal assistant that knows you, remembers, is aligned with your goals, and is trustworthy, and an AI that can solve genuinely hard problems for you. That's the mental frame for the Superapp, not a shiny bundle, a forced choice about where the next year of progress gets spent. When Brockman says Superapp, he's describing one endpoint where chat, coding, and browsing collapse into a single experience. ChatGPT becomes your personal assistant, your personal AGI, the system that represents you in the digital world. Codex, which started as a tool for software engineers, becomes Codex for everyone, meaning anyone can describe intent and have the computer do the thing. The concrete example he gave is almost aggressively mundane. He forgets how to set up hot corners on his laptop, asks Codex, and it just does it. The computer contorts to you instead of you contorting to the computer. The bigger deal is unification under the hood. It's no longer just about the model, it's the harness. How does the model get context? How does it connect to your tools? What actions can it take? OpenAI had multiple, slightly different implementations of that. Brockman says they're converging to one AI layer that can be pointed at specific applications with a thin UI, and you might not even need purpose-built software in finance or legal. He says pieces ship over the next couple months, starting by making the Codex app more usable for general knowledge work, because internally they've watched non-engineers wrestle with it and still get huge leverage. Now they have to remove the developer-only tripwires so normal people don't bounce off error messages and give up. If you want to understand OpenAI's posture, start with Brockman's answer to how much compute should we buy? Right after ChatGPT launched, his team asked. He said, all of it. His claim is that no matter how much they build, they can't keep up with demand. And because large compute purchases get locked in 18 to 24 months before delivery, you're always betting on a future you can't fully see. He frames compute not as a cost setter, but as a revenue setter, like hiring salespeople. If you can sell what you're producing, more capacity turns into more revenue. And he argues the world they're moving toward is compute-strapped across the board. The interesting part is where he expects demand to come from. So far, he says, most revenue is consumer subscriptions, and that stays important. But the emerging opportunity is knowledge work inside companies where every single enterprise is realizing it works, and adoption is becoming necessary to stay competitive. He also blurs the categories on purpose. Personal versus business, he says, is like asking whether your laptop is personal or business. It's both, and it's yours. That's the bet. Be the portal, and then try to build enough compute so the portal doesn't constantly say no. Compute scarcity forces painful decisions about what launches, what gets delayed, and which branch of the future gets to exist this year. The most revealing strategic moment in the conversation is how he talks about Sora. Brockman calls the Sora models incredible, but says they're on a different branch of the tech tree than the core GPT reasoning series. Pursuing both branches is hard to sustain when compute is limited and demand is exploding. So the primary focus, for this moment, is pushing the GPT series. And he's careful about what that means. Not text only. He mentions a strong speech-to-speech interface as part of making the system truly usable. The emphasis is unified progress inside one technological envelope. When Alex brings up a counterpoint Demis Hassabis made, that image generation can feel closest to AGI because you need some world understanding to generate images and video, Brockman concedes the risk. Yes, you can miss something when you bet, but he also tries to collapse the disagreement. Image generation inside ChatGPT remains a priority because it's based on the GPT architecture rather than a totally separate diffusion model branch. If you branch too far, you end up maintaining two different artifacts, and compute reality punishes that. Then he drops a motivating example for why you'd double down on the reasoning path. OpenAI had a result where a physicist gave a problem to the model, and about 12 hours later it produced a solution. The physicist said it was the first time a model felt like it was thinking. His takeaway isn't, "Look how smart we are." It's, "When you see that, you triple down." Get the general problem solver to the next level, because it unlocks everything else. There's a section where the conversation turns to a rumored model internally called SPUD. Brockman doesn't play the naming game. He describes it as a new base model from pre-training, the foundation for everything they do next. And he lays out their pipeline plainly. Pre-training gives you the base. Then, reinforcement learning and post-training turn that base into something that practices problem-solving in many contexts, and then gets the last-mile behavior and usability. He says SPUD represents maybe 2 years of research coming to fruition in one base model, and that it's never about one release because the engine keeps going. He predicts it solves much harder problems, follows instructions more precisely, and understands context more deeply. Then he uses a phrase that feels like an engineer trying to describe a vibe. Big model smell. When you ask something and it actually bends to you instead of forcing you to restate the prompt 3 different ways like you're negotiating with a vending machine. He also predicts a shift in both the ceiling and the floor. The ceiling is longer time horizons and more open-ended problems, like the physics example. The floor is that for almost anything you want to do, it becomes the default tool. And he adds a subtle but important point. Even if the tech improves quickly, people's mental model of what AI can do shifts slowly. You need a few magical experiences before you start trusting it with higher stakes work. He tells 2 stories that made that concrete for him. A friend used ChatGPT to understand treatment options for cancer after doctors said there was nothing they could do, and found a path to treatment. Another family used ChatGPT to research symptoms and make the case to insurance for an MRI, which found a brain tumor and helped save a child's life. His point is about adoption psychology. Belief and familiarity are part of the ramp, not just capability. Brockman describes takeoff in 2 ways. One is technical acceleration, where AI helps make AI better, speeding up development. The other is economic momentum, with chip makers, builders, and companies piling in, turning AI into a main driver of growth. This is where the automated AI researcher comes in, something he says they're building for the fall. The way he explains it is, basically, a research scientist in silicon, not unleashed without oversight, but managed like you'd manage a junior researcher. With direction, review, and feedback, you get compounding progress. Brockman describes a future where you become the CEO of a fleet of hundreds of thousands of agents completing your objectives. That sounds empowering until you hit the trade-off. You can lose your finger on the pulse. He argues accountability doesn't go away. If an agent ships something broken and users get hurt, it's not the agent's fault, it's yours. And if you're too far from the details, you're not going to get great results. So the new skill isn't delegate everything, it's setting direction, reviewing work, building calibrated trust, and knowing which details you can safely not care about. It's management as a lifestyle choice. On risk, Brockman's position is not "don't worry." It's if you want the benefits, you have to think seriously about the risks. A concrete example he gives is prompt injection. If an AI is powerful, connected to tools, and able to take actions, you have to make sure it can't be subverted by weird instructions. He says OpenAI invests heavily in safety and security there, and draws analogies to humans being susceptible to phishing and deception. Then comes a more philosophical question. If this is a race, and open-source players may have fewer safety boundaries, is the reward worth the risk? His answer is yes, but he reframes it. It's not just a choice between one centralized actor versus chaos. He favors resilience, lots of players building the tech, and building societal infrastructure around it, similar to how electricity has safety standards, regulations at massive scales, inspectors, and a broader system. On public opinion, he's unusually direct. He thinks they haven't done a good job showing people how AI is good for them personally, not just GDP. He's also blunt about data setters, saying there's misinformation. He claims OpenAI's Abilene facility uses about the same amount of water as a household over the course of a year. On energy, he says they're committed to paying their own way so they don't drive up prices. You can hear the shape of the political challenge. This tech needs massive infrastructure, and the public mood is skeptical. Brockman's prescription is basically, show up better, tell real stories, and build the surrounding system, not just the model. If you strip all the product talk away, Brockman's core claim is this: AGI isn't a single finish line. It's a jagged slope where the floor keeps rising until, in his view, within a couple years, the AI can do almost any intellectual task involved in using your computer. And the most practical advice he gives is simple. Try the tools. Not as a party trick. Put them into your workflow until you get over the blank box problem where you don't know what to ask. Then, build the skill that actually matters in an agentic world. Agency. The ability to set direction, delegate, provide oversight, and stay accountable without drowning in mechanics. If you want the full texture of how OpenAI is thinking about compute scarcity, the Superapp, and why he's 70–80% to his own definition of AGI, listen to Greg Brockman's full conversation with Alex Kantrowitz on the Big Technology podcast. The unsettling question underneath all of it isn't whether the machines will do the work. It's what you'll choose to do once they can.